Welcome to Growth Minded Contractor. I am Ryan Groth, the host of Growth Minded Contractor, and I have a very special guest today. So welcome to the show, Fyfe. What's going on, my friend?
Not much. I'm excited to be here.
Good to see you. So Fyfe, it's Barraclough, right?
Barraclough. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah. From Uplife Mental Fitness, mental training, and so excited to have you here to talk about how to improve our state mentally and improve our overall performance. So why don't you give us a quick background on who you are and what we're going to jump into today.
Yeah. So I'm a mental fitness coach, but my background has been in entrepreneurship. So got my start in running a painting business. I was running a painting franchise for a couple, probably like 3 or 4 seasons, and ended up starting a little business buying and selling sweaters from Ecuador, which kind of fizzled out pretty quickly, but that was a ton of fun. And found my way into a furnace and Dutch cleaning franchise, which I still own with a business partner, and that runs on the side with a general manager. Spent a little bit of time in a startup, coaching physiotherapists and accelerating their business. And yeah, fast forward a little bit. I'm a coach. I love working with entrepreneurs, helping them get unstuck, and specifically focusing on how they self-sabotage and the cycles that we all fall into there, and mental fitness as well. That's a snapshot of what I'm up to and where I've been.
Yeah. And with your background, we got connected to one another through the BTA guys. I know Benji, shout out to BTA and Benji making that introduction. And so you got a background in contracting, and you have a familiarity with our audience. So you know what their day-to-day is like, life in their pants and their shoes and in their world. So you could talk about self-sabotaging, right? You can talk about let's just dive right in. Like what is all that about? Like when you talk about self-sabotaging, what does that mean? What are some of the consequences and the impacts, in people's lives as entrepreneurs and business owners, and how are you helping? Let's dive into that.
Yeah. And actually it might help to bring a little bit more context to like mental fitness as a whole, because it weaves directly into the self-sabotaging aspect. So high level, I'm using the term mental fitness. I'm certified with an organization to deliver training, and there's more and more people moving into that space. But the high level definition is your ability to handle life's challenges with a positive rather than a negative mindset. So often stress at home or at work or just in general life, challenges show up, and we tend to navigate those challenges from a place of negative emotions, and that just can create more issues and more challenges and more stress. So the idea behind mental fitness is, how do we cultivate our capacity to handle those increasing challenges with positive emotions? And an analogy, like if you use physical fitness as an analogy, you can watch as many videos and read as many books about running a marathon, but you have to train and put in the time and conditioning to actually run a marathon.
Right.
So in a similar sense with mental fitness, a lot of the time we're learning about emotional intelligence, and we're learning about leadership, conflict management, things like that at an insight level, but we're not actually building or cultivating the practice so that in the heat of the moment we have access to that. So that's what mental fitness kind of brings to the table. What got me so excited about it when I first kind of dove in. And then the question around like self-sabotage. So how does that fit in? One of the key aspects of mental fitness is your awareness of how you're getting in your own way. So one of the top ways that I get in my own way is people pleasing. So a lot of what happens is we have these underlying strengths and they help us out in a lot of situations, but as we get more into survival mode, we use and abuse those strengths, and it becomes our greatest weakness. So for me, I'm a pleaser. I want people to be happy. I like to be liked. So I tend to say yes to a lot of things. I may not directly say exactly what's on my mind because I want somebody to like me and I'm worried about their reaction, and that's what I've addressed with myself. But what happens is I say yes to more and more, and I'm not saying what I want, and it can lead to resentment. It can lead to cycles of burnout. So that thing that, if it's used well, can be a strength, being kind, connecting, wanting to be helpful. But then it just kind of comes full circle and bites me.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing that. So when you said mental fitness and you likened it to running a marathon, I started to think about my mind having more stamina and more endurance to run longer and faster. But it only came through the stress that I probably encountered, right? And then it's like my perspective as, mentally to handle the stress in a positive way is actually what starts to make me a really good mental marathon runner versus just, watching it on TV or whatever, or watching other people be mentally fit. It's like, oh, Fyfe is so mentally fit, or, Tony Robbins or Joe Rogan, or you're just like looking at these people who are seemingly like super high performing, and then you think you're a high performer. That's what I'm getting is like, oh, I'm going to be a high performer, so let me watch Jordan, the guy Jordan, who's what's his name? He's got like 12 principles of life, all these amazing high performers, and they think they're going to become a high performer and be mentally fit by watching them. But it's actually by the doing of the thing and handling the stress and your positive response. Like that, it's interesting you say that, because I have so many people who quote and talk about this stuff a lot that I know, and I'm like, but I can see through it. But I'm like, but you're not going to get anywhere because you can quote that guy. It's actually you're doing it and you're grinding and you're keeping a positive outlook. Is like, that's what I'm hearing. It's actually really encouraging me because I've heard some proverbs or some sayings about like, when you suffer trials, like, consider that joy, like consider it as joy because that's forming something in you. And it's like, how do you positively look at challenges? Right?
Yeah, totally. And I think what struck me with what you said is, you need to be out doing things. Like you need to be actively placing yourself in a situation where you are challenged. You can't just sit at home and expect to, like, you can sit at home and learn this intellectually, but to put into practice, you have to be out in the field doing things. And I like the distinction between how I'm defining mental fitness and then another really popular and healthy thing too is grit and the hustle. So there's an aspect of like the hustle and grit and just pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself, which isn't healthy. And I think it gets taken too far. So the distinction I like to make is, how do you handle challenges from a positive mindset? Because there's a lot of people that are pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're beating themselves up. They're like, I'm not good enough. I need to be better. Like their internal self-talk and dialogue is actually cutting them down, and they might actually achieve something. Like I watched the Michael Jordan documentary, and I was like, man, this guy has achieved a ton. He doesn't seem happy though. He doesn't seem like he has great relationships with the people around him. So yes, it's driven him to extreme heights, but what's the cost of how he's motivated himself? And I think there's a lot of buy-in to that, and there's a lot of truth, and like, I'm not taking anything away from what he's done, but I think there are other ways to tap into our internal reservoir of like, how do we motivate ourselves?
Interesting. That's really cool. Like I think about Tom Brady, like he's won 6 or 7 championships, but he doesn't seem very happy. he seems to be
And
like,
then,
oh, next one, what's my favorite ring? The next one.
well, and like, what a trap for entrepreneurs. It's like you set your goal and your milestone, and then you beat it, and then you're like, okay, what's the next one? And you're like constantly in this hamster wheel of chasing the next goal that you're not actually present and celebrating what you've actually accomplished so far.
Yeah, no doubt. So people pleasing, that's a that's interesting, right? It's like, so how have you overcome that? What do you like? What do you do, or what do you recommend somebody to do if they have a people pleasing, like, is an example of self-sabotaging behavior in their lives? Like, what do you do? What do you teach somebody?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest step is your awareness of it. Um, and I think that's what I loved about mental fitness was it actually brought a practice, a daily simple practice of that awareness,
Mm-hmm.
to a point where I was able to see it. Like my awareness was heightened through that practice, and part of it is the root level um, building blocks of mindfulness and meditation. Um, the difference being a lot of the time when we refer to meditation, we we can't do it in the heat of the moment. So it's like you're stressed and in conflict with somebody, or something's happened, and you're like, you can't just be like, hey, hang on, guys, I'm gonna go like meditate for 20 minutes by myself in a dark room. Um, so mental fitness, there's similar aspects of it, but it's like, how do we make it more actionable in the heat of the moment? So it might be as simple as focusing on the ridges of your fingertips and rubbing them back and forth. So something simple like that grounds you for a second to slow down, and it pops you out of the left side of your brain. So just bringing in like a really simplistic view of the brain. There's the left side of your brain, which is a lot more linear and analytical, but it also is what motivates through negative emotions. So
Mm-hmm.
fear, anxiety, stress, guilt. And often we're kind of operating in that hemisphere with the situations that we're in. Flip side is the right side of your brain has access to empathy, curiosity, creativity, and a positive emotional state. So the simplicity of like slowing down, feeling your fingertips, being grounded in the present moment actually shifts your neural wiring a little bit and gives you a chance to have a bit more pause and then decide, do I want to move into people pleasing, or do I want to move into like clear laser focused action?
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like super simple and kind of weird, but that act of slowing down, being really in tune with what's happening right now, can slow you down enough to have a bit more awareness of that pattern. But as you increase that and do it more and more over time, you start to see it everywhere. Like you start to see it grow and grow. And what I coach people on, and what like I've challenged myself with too, is what do you replace it with? And I think that's a big trap that we fall into. Is it's like, okay, I don't want to do this thing, but you can't just say I'm not going to do that. You have to replace it with something. So what's the new thing I'm replacing that with? And for me, with the people pleasing, it's having empathy for the person that I'm with and for myself. Like for me, as a people pleaser, I put everybody ahead of myself, and having more empathy for myself and checking in with myself allows me to see that I'm crossing a boundary that I've set internally. So that's helped me see those more and speak up more. And there's just like that process of practice too, of just speaking up and sharing what's going on. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but that's some aspects of what I would coach somebody on and how that might help.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm just thinking what was coming into my mind as you were sharing that was, how sometimes we make choices to do something or say something, in response or in reaction in a moment of stress, right? It's like, you could do something as really animated as punching the wall, and now you're mad that you broke your hand, or you snap at a family member because you're stressed out and there's something that's happening in the moment, and they're just saying, "Daddy, you gonna come to eat breakfast with me?" And you're like, "Not now," just kidding. No, but just that's obviously a really intense example. But then even something more subtle, which is you experience something stressful. Maybe it's a lot of money you have to spend, or suddenly something intense. The size of the proposal of something that you need, to grow your business is way more than you really want to spend, or it could be a lot of things, and that subtle choice adds, it compounds to the next choice. Like where your existence that you're in now is a result of what you did when you were existing in a choice before, and what you decided to do with your own brain. And I love what you're doing, where you're just like slow down, because I think that most of us know what's right and what's wrong. I think most of us know they have the answers on the inside. Like, it's God, the spirit, your moral compass, some grandfather's voice said to do the right thing, whatever it is on the inside of you. I mean, I believe it's God and me, but personally, but I think everybody knows the real answer, but not everybody takes the time to just, rub your fingertips and like center thyself for a moment. Because then, like, I'm just thinking, man, if we're always in the past or always in the future, or always afraid of the future, or always worried about the past, we're not able to stay present enough to make the right choice in the moment, which is ultimately what our future is built on, is present made choices. So it's like, you gotta have your brain's got to be aware. And I think what you're telling the audience today is to take a moment to bring awareness to that emotion, or your response to that stressful situation, and then replace it with something. And if you have empathy on yourself by pleasing somebody, you might be like, hey, if I was talking to myself, I probably would say, share what's on your mind versus just bury it, right? That's pretty cool. I'm getting really, just listening to you, I'm getting quite, reconnected to present moments in times of stress, and how they can actually be really good for us and help us grow.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
And I mean, like it can happen. Like I've done 1 or 2 podcasts before. I haven't done a ton. And like, I could feel a bit of like light stress and anxiety, be like, I have to perform, right? I gotta nail this. I gotta do a good job. Same with sales. It's like you have this big opportunity and you don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. And that survival brain kicks in where you're like, don't screw this up. I need to nail this. And like, there's this added psychological pressure and stress that we put on ourselves. And then that gets communicated when you're in a sales presentation, when you're trying to land this big client. Like they're picking up all these subtle cues of you being on edge and anxious. And when you're in that survival state, that's when you lean into these saboteur tendencies. So for me as a people pleaser, I might not push back in a negotiation. I might be like, yeah, I just want to get this. I just want to make you happy. For somebody else, like another archetype of self-sabotage is the controller. They want to control the situation and dominate it, because that helps them alleviate the sense of anxiety that comes with being out of control. So in a sales situation like that, somebody might really dominate the conversation and they don't actually get the full scope of what the customer wants, because they're just trying to control the situation. But that initial anxiety that shows up, that's what like that little bit of grounding can help with. It helps slow you down a little bit. And it actually, it's shifting you from that survival brain to that more creative, empathic brain. So for somebody in sales, I mean, the biggest weapon you have, or biggest tool you have, is being able to connect with that person and understand them and like tap into empathy and creativity. So when you're like heightened and like stressed and anxious, it all those things you learned about how to do sales kind of go out the window because you're not present. You're kind of like all over the place thinking about what you should do rather than just being with that client and serving them. So for me, it's kind of like all these things that are so helpful that we learn. If we're not able to manage our stress and ourselves at a foundational level, we can't use those tools that we've learned. And a lot of that shows up in conflict management and stuff like that too. But like, especially high pressure sales, like, yeah, it's, to me, it's foundational, to help leverage all those tools that we have. But, and going back to this podcast, it's like, I had to like slow myself down. And like, even in this, I have to like, slow down, Fyfe. Like, we got time to have a fun chat with Ryan. Like, I don't have to like get all of the things in my head out. So I practice it like I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. Good words there. I'm thinking about the other archetypes of saboteuring or sabotaging.
Yeah.
What else? What are some other ones?
So another common one that I see, especially for entrepreneurs, but like just driven people, and I think it might be a bit of the sign of the times too. It's called the restless saboteur. And it's the type of person that's can get easily distracted. And it's not that they just get distracted. There's like when something's uncomfortable or there's boredom or there's something that's doesn't feel great, it's like, I'm going to task switch. I'm going to go do something else. This might be like a micro level thing where you're trying to do your work.
Our next channel, swipe, you know.
Boom, swipe. Like, yeah, it might be like a micro level thing on your day-to-day tasks that you have to do, and you're avoiding the tasks that you should do. So you do the things that are more pleasant, and you just like kind of distract yourself. But this can also show up bigger picture in the scope of your business, where you're focused on a project and you hit a bit of an obstacle and you're like, bright shiny object syndrome, like, I'm gonna go do that thing instead. So the analogy is, or like the parable is, like, there's a guy in the desert and he's got a shovel and he's trying to dig for water, and he digs 2 feet down, doesn't find water. It's like, oh, there's no water here. Where's the next? And digs another hole 2 feet down, digs another hole 2 feet down, and he just does this and then like ends up dying. Whereas if he had just stuck with the first hole, dug 6 feet down, he would have hit water. So it's that mentality of slowing down a little bit, or like that's what they struggle with, and you like, I notice it when I'm with people that are like that. They're just like, they're jittery, they're all over the place, they seem a little bit unfocused, they bounce between ideas a ton, and I have to also like say, like, there is a strength here. These people are really flexible, they're adaptable, they like newness and novelty. So like, there are strengths to each of the saboteurs. Right. It's just when you're in survival mode, you lean into it more, and then it kind of becomes your biggest weakness. So that's another one that I see show up. I can list off a couple other ones if that helps bring some more color. What do you think?
This is good. Yeah.
Another big one, the avoider. So it might be essentially it's like procrastination.
Yeah.
So you're avoiding a task that you don't like, and that's different from the restless, where you're not like, the restless would distract and go do something else. The avoider just puts it aside. So it's a different form of dealing with the discomfort. But for a lot of clients that I've worked with, they avoid conflict. So to have conflict is uncomfortable, and part of that is because there's an inherent perspective that conflict is bad. that it's a bad thing. It's like, why don't we reframe that to conflict can be healthy and actually deepen relationships? So there's an underlying perspective there, but what happens is we avoid the conflict because that's our strategy for not feeling the discomfort. But then things fester, it gets worse, and it kind of blows up in your face way more so than if you had just kind of dealt with it head on.
So you have the controller, the people pleaser, the avoider, or procrastinator. You have the ADHD one.
Yeah.
All over the place.
Which is interesting. So I've been doing a bunch of interviews with entrepreneurial dads, and there's definitely a trend of people either diagnosed with ADHD or would like self-identify with those tendencies on that end of the spectrum. So there's definitely like, again, there's strengths with ADHD if you can leverage it and you kind of know what you're up against. So it's just interesting. I mean, awareness is great. Just talking about some of these saboteurs and some of these archetypes, people might be like, oh yeah, that kind of sounds like me. I relate to that. And so there's an assessment that I share with clients. It's free. It takes about 5 minutes, and it shows you the top ways that you self-sabotage. So there's 9 archetypal ways, and it's like any self-assessment. It's a snapshot. It's not like this is who you are. Yeah. It's more of a, now you have a bit of a wanted poster so you can catch the criminal. It's like, oh yeah, the people pleaser. That's kind of like what this person is and how they show up, or that's how I show up. So it makes it easier for me to see it in the act. There's 9 different ways, and I'll make sure we leave the link with you, Ryan, for your audience. And that is the first step, is just having that conversation with yourself. And I would highly suggest doing it with your teams, if you have a team or like an immediate team that you're working on, and ideally your wife or your partner. It's been amazingly helpful for me to have some accountability with my wife around, this is how she self-sabotages, this is how I self-sabotage. And it gives us a language to help identify it for the other person if they're in that mode. So if they're in this stressful state and you see them operating in a way, it's like, hey, like, it looks like you're in that kind of saboteur mode, instead of being like, hey, you're doing this wrong. So it's a gentle way to kind of like have some language around when people are stressed. But what do you do with this? So you have this great assessment. Now what? For a lot of people, that can be enough to start seeing it in different areas. What I do with clients is I take them through 8-week programming where we're meeting weekly. There's daily practices in an app, and the app is what really drives daily practice. So there's some accountability with it. And essentially it's mini micro mental fitness and visualizations around, where is this showing up? Often we only reflect in the morning or at night. So how do we start to catch these patterns in the act midday? So if you're not interested in like going into the deep programming, what I would suggest for somebody is set an alarm once or twice a day to check in with yourself. Like, am I in this restless pattern? Am I in this people-pleasing pattern? And it's just like, it kind of jars you to kind of take a look, because often we're in our day-to-day, we're moving so fast that we don't have the space to see it when it's happening.
So maybe you could describe for me, like, just give me the optimal version of yourself, oneself. They're not restless, they're not controlling, they're not self-sabotaging by people pleasing and avoiding. Like, what would you say in somewhat of a fully inclusive way to describe a person who's no longer self-sabotaging? How would you describe the way they handle conflict?
It's a great question. So we're never not going to self-sabotage. we're never not going to have negative emotions. So I think that's the first thing I would say is like, that's not going to go away. The trick with this is how do we recognize it way faster? So,
But let's say I recognize it. Now, who am I now? That
yeah.
I guess is it like, what's the true north? Is it love? Is it like, what's the true north, right?
So especially for conflict, the process I take clients through is one, catch the saboteur. Like, where are you on that spectrum? Are you deep in survival mode and reactionary, or are you actually in this thriving, creative, empathic state? So just where are you now? And then checking in, it's like, what's your underlying fear with the situation? Like, what's creating the stress for you? Exploring that a little bit. And then moving into empathy. So having empathy for yourself in the situation, because often we're beating ourselves up and we're holding ourselves to a really high standard, and that projects onto the other person. So slowing down and having some empathy. But really the big one is placing yourself in that other person's shoes. So it's one of those things that sounds simple. Just put yourself in somebody else's shoes. But I'm talking like slowing down, closing your eyes, picturing yourself walking through their day. What might they be worried about? What do you think their underlying fear is in this situation? What do you think they really want out of the situation? And when I walk clients through this, often there's these aha moments where they're like, wow, I never really considered that they might be feeling this way. And it slows people down. So tapping into that empathic state can make some new connections. And then from there to move through conflict, often conflict has this notion of win-lose. That's why we get into conflict is like either I win or they win. It's zero sum. So you need to shift that mentality to be like, how do we both make this win-win?
Yeah,
and often in conflict, you need to be the one to step in and have that mentality. So if you're in survival mode, you're all heightened and anxious and wanting to make sure you don't get taken advantage of, that nonverbal communication is going to get picked up and that other person will get triggered. We have mirror neurons that literally absorb that from other people. So just having yourself in a grounded state first is huge. But yeah, again, coming from a place of how do we make this win-win?
I love that.
How do we get creative on that?
Win-win isn't us just, about the other, or it's not just about you, it's about everybody. Because I love that. So you can have this assessment that's in the show notes for our listeners if you guys want to check that out. And get Fyfe to train your team or you, or spend some time with you and your organization. And I know as leaders, as salespeople, as everywhere we are, if we can, I just think about those people who sabotage or saboteur, living that the imposter, that person who really isn't fully themselves, is active in their life. You never look at them and say, man, I feel so safe with them. You're like, no, I feel like you don't know what's going to happen, with that person. And obviously, like, that's a very, it's somebody who's really in a sabotaging place. But I could see the progression of a person and their leadership impact and how they steward life, and what's before them is the people who can remain calm, always find the opportunity in something, and make everybody feel like they're a part of a greater solution. That's pretty powerful stuff, no matter where you're at. If you're selling, if you're leading a company, if you're leading a home, a spouse. So very good stuff. Fyfe, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about what you guys are doing?
Yeah. So I'll have a link. LinkedIn is easy. Fyfe Barraclough. I'll have I can share my website with you guys as well, uplifementalfitness.com. And if people are curious, like I'm very open. I love chatting with people and sharing more about it just to give them some context. So happy to chat with whoever and support people. I just had the opportunity to chat with a past client just before this and grab a video testimonial, and he was like, man, like it's an absolute game changer, and it fills me up and it gives me goosebumps when I get to get like just share that gift, because somebody's given it to me, and for me to be able to share that with other people is super exciting.
Love it. I appreciate you, Fyfe. And we'll say goodbye in a second, but we have partners at STG. I want to give a shout out to Engage. So Engage is it's a very powerful presentation platform. We're implementing it at STG now, and what it is, it actually takes you through from slides or PowerPoint or whatever your traditional presentation software is, or what you're delivering it on, and puts you in more of an experience in the presentation process. So we're really fired up. I cannot wait to use it ourselves. Every company, contractor we work with that does work with Engage is finding their sales performance increasing, their closing ratio going up, because their presentations are sticking out. And so we're going to be using those going into 2023 on all of our products, and I'm pretty fired up about it. So check out Engage. Tell them that Ryan Groth sent you from a Sales Transformation Group, and go check those guys out. We'll hopefully have a link as well in the notes. But thank you guys. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Check out our other episodes of Growth Minded Contractor. This is the show where growth minded contractors can come to grow and learn about their business, about themselves personally, even spiritually, professionally, having a lot of fun on these episodes. So check it out, and give Fyfe a follow on LinkedIn, and check him out. Thanks.